If you started Star Trek Voyager, across the unknown, thinking it's just another strategy game, you've probably already had that basic shock. Here, a small mistake becomes a big crisis. And a big crisis becomes a mutiny, low morale, and crew members you'll never see again. So today, I'm going to give you 10 very practical tips to drastically improve your crew, stop bleeding resources without realizing it, and make the Voyager finally function like an exploration ship, not a walking disaster in the Delta Quadrant. You know that feeling that you're always one step behind in space battles and your resources seem to evaporate out of nowhere? Yeah, I went through that a lot until I discovered a trick that completely changed my game. The secret isn't in shooting faster or dodging better, but in something that the game, curiously, forgets to tell you clearly: passive energy management. The truth is that keeping all the rooms and systems of your ship active simultaneously is a real drain on your deuterium. If you play in autopilot mode, leaving everything on while navigating from one system to another, you'll notice that your supplies disappear in the blink of an eye. The trick here is to understand that you don't need the sickbay or the labs consuming maximum energy while you're just cruising through space or entering combat. And this is where the big pro tip comes in: the tactical pause. Right at the start of any confrontation, or even before entering a dangerous area, press that button. With the action frozen, you have all the time in the world to redirect all energy from non-essential systems. Turn off what won't help you survive in the next 5 minutes and throw all that extra load directly into shields and weapons. This small change of habit transforms battles that seemed impossible into super controllable confrontations. Your shields will take much more of a beating, and your weapons will have the necessary support to melt the enemy ship before it does the same to you. Besides saving your crew's lives, you also save a lot of deuterium in the long run. Test this on your next run and tell me if the Voyager doesn't feel like a completely different ship. When you start a new campaign, it's very easy to get carried away by the excitement of exploring the Delta Quadrant in this survival and strategy game. But I learned the hard way that the true threat isn't enemy ships right off the bat, but hunger. My biggest golden tip for you to survive the first hours of the game is to repair the mess hall immediately. It seems like a silly detail when you're in command of a state-of-the-art starship, but believe me, it's the most important decision you'll make at the beginning of the journey. The reality of the game is brutal, and your crew's morale plummets frighteningly if basic needs aren't met. I noticed in my first sessions that the lack of food is the main trigger for internal chaos among the fleet members. It doesn't matter if you have the best officers or if you made perfect tactical decisions during away missions, because if people's stomachs are growling, despair takes over. The mess hall isn't just a place to rest, but the heart of the ship that keeps everyone sane and focused on the goal of returning to Earth. Therefore, increasing food production early is an absolutely crucial step for your success in the campaign. When you repair the mess hall right at the first moment, you guarantee a stability that allows you to focus on managing other resources and making difficult decisions with much more peace of mind. I strongly recommend that you invest your first precious materials in this structure before thinking about improving shields or weapons. Having a constant food source early on takes a huge weight off the captain's shoulders and prevents you from entering a snowball of management problems in the future. If you ignore this priority, prepare to face the worst possible scenario, which is mutiny. A crew with morale on the floor and without enough food will turn against you quickly, and losing control of people in the middle of a dangerous sector ends your match in a matter of minutes. As the experience brings elements where situations are different with each attempt, the title does not forgive basic survival errors. Put this strategy into practice the next time you take the command chair and see how progression through unknown space becomes much more stable. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that the crew doesn't break first from a lack of ammunition, but from day-to-day wear and tear in a game that mixes survival and management very closely. And the trick that most changed my runs was simple. I started prioritizing emergency quarters as early as possible because poor sleep slowly erodes morale until the ship becomes a pressure cooker. In the beginning, I also fell into that trap of thinking I'll fix where the people sleep later. But this constant loss of morale due to a lack of beds is the kind of silent problem that sabotages you without you noticing, especially when the crew starts to grow or when you return from a heavier mission. When I finally made emergency quarters a real priority, I felt the difference immediately. The atmosphere stabilizes, and you stop putting out emotional fires all the time. The way I like to play is this. As soon as the first resource window opens, I already look at how many beds I have versus how many people are on board, and I don't leave it at the limit. I build emergency quarters as soon as possible and try to keep some leeway, because it always happens that you recruit someone, lose time in an event, or get stuck in a sequence of decisions, and the lack of a bed becomes a permanent debuff on morale. This isn't glamour, but it's the kind of foundation that lets the rest of your plan work. And there's a detail. When sleep is sorted out, you gain the freedom to prioritize other things without feeling like the ship is crumbling from the inside. Emergency quarters aren't a luxury, they are crisis containment. And in Across the Unknown, I treat them as part of Voyager's survival kit, along with food and repairs. If you do this early, your crew performs better, complains less, and you can focus on what really matters, crossing the unknown without morale pulling you down every minute. A tip I wish I had heard before getting excited about different choices is beware of the so-called second Be'alana, because this is that type of decision that seems like just a curious mission event, but it can become a permanent scar on your sector. And by the time you realize it, it's too late. You took a path that closed doors without properly warning you. In practice, what I saw happen is this. In certain missions, choosing something like splitting Be'alana might even sound like a creative solution, but it can block optimized variants of her from appearing later. And B'Elanna isn't just any character in your planning. If you weaken access to better versions, you are directly messing with the future of your engineering. Result: more difficulty sustaining repairs, upgrades, and ship stability further down the road when the game starts to demand it. So my trick here is very down to earth. Treat any choice involving B'Elanna as a long-term decision. I stop, reread the option text calmly, and if the game allows, I make a save before this type of fork in the road, because that's exactly where the trap lies. If you want a more efficient run, hold back the curiosity of seeing what happens and think, am I gaining something now, or am I losing a power ceiling for later? And if you've already chosen wrong and felt the engineering get wonky, don't blame yourself. It happens. The important thing is to turn this into a mental rule. A story event with a key character isn't just flavor, it's the economy of your sector. One of the things that most changed my performance was stopping playing as if each sector was a mandatory passage and starting to treat the map as a place I can revisit with intention when it's safe. Sometimes, just delaying your departure from a sector a bit to grab more resources makes your crew truly strong, because you enter the next stretch with more room for repairs, production, and difficult decisions. The point is that revisiting a sector isn't free farming, it's a trade-off. The longer you stay, the more fatigue and dropping morale appear, and if you ignore this, exploration becomes a punishment. I like to think of it this way. Each detour needs to have a clear reason, like finishing a collection you missed, seeking a resource that is blocking an upgrade, or completing an event that will leave you better prepared for what comes next. My practical trick is to set a mental limit before insisting. I'll look around a bit more, but only until the crew starts showing signs of wear. If I see that food, rest, and morale are starting to get thin, I end the visit, even if there are still little things in the sector. When you do this, exploration becomes strategy and not an addiction. And you avoid that domino effect where you gain resources now, but pay with an irritated and unproductive crew later. And most importantly, revisiting a sector is only worth it if the risk is under control. If the way back exposes you too much, or if you're already feeling the ship heavy in management, get out of the sector and that's it. Because the campaign charges a high price when morale enters a constant decline. The balance here is simple. Explore to grow, but respect the crew's human limit, because that's what keeps Voyager running when the unknown gets tough. In the middle of the campaign, I realized that morale becomes a resource as important as any building material, because the game constantly puts you in this balance of management and survival. And that's where a tip comes in. That seems like just Star Trek fan service, but in practice, saves runs. Rebuild the holodeck and start using it as an emotional safety valve for the crew. For me, the holodeck works like that breather when food starts getting low, and you know you won't be able to normalize supplies immediately. At this time, the classic mistake is trying to push through one more sector in misery, thinking you can handle it. And that's when morale melts and you lose productivity, enter a spiral, and start making worse decisions. When I have the holodeck available, I can buy time with morale, stabilize the mood, and continue operating without the ship turning into chaos. I like to treat this as a mid-game plan. Around the more advanced sectors, for me, it usually hits hard from 6+ onwards, when costs increase and unforeseen events are more frequent. If I see that my stocks are at the limit, and I still have to do repairs, missions, or cross a tensor stretch, I prioritize getting the holodeck up and use it actively, not just when everything is already on fire. It's the kind of thing you use before the collapse, so you don't need to heal a morale that's already destroyed. Just don't get confused. The holodeck doesn't replace food or solve structural problems on its own. It just gives you room to breathe and reorganize the house. I always think like this. First, I ensure I won't sink in basic needs. And the holodeck comes in as a morale maintenance tool when the game forces you to spend a few cycles in a tight spot. Used this way, it stops being thematic and becomes one of the most consistent ways to keep the crew functional when supplies are low. One of the things that saved me the most time and frustration was understanding the right order of research tiers, because the game doesn't always make this obvious when you're in the rhythm of the campaign. I've already lost precious minutes thinking I was already researching something important, when in reality, I had just let auto-research deceive me. The trick is simple. You need to research the Tier 2 itself before you can research specific Tier 2 items. If you try to click directly on a Tier 2 technology without first enabling Tier 2 on the tree, the queue might get weird, automation might fail, and you're left with the feeling that the game froze or that you're missing resources when in fact you're missing the basic prerequisite. What I do now, every time I'm about to enter the mid-game, I open the tech tree and manually click on the Tier 2 node first, confirm that it entered as active research, and only then do I choose the Tier 2 technologies I actually want. If autoqueue is on, I always give the order a quick check, because sometimes it tries to skip a step or promise a research that can't happen yet. This improves your crew in an indirect but huge way, because it puts you earlier into the upgrades that unlock efficiency, sustainability, and consistency in crises. For me, this is the difference between reaching the next sector with the ship truly evolving or getting stuck with falling morale and decisions getting tighter just because the research got stuck in an invisible step. I started playing away missions in always send the best mode, and that worked for a while, until I realized that I was sabotaging my own crew in a game that demands resource and people management all the time. Your away team's fatigue isn't just a detail. It gradually lowers your success rate, and by the time you realize it, those tasks that were guaranteed turn into a sequence of failures that delay everything. My trick here is to view away teams as a cast, not as a fixed trio of stars. If a character just got back from a tough mission, I avoid sending them again on the next critical task, even if they are the best in that attribute. In my experience, this improves consistency. You stop depending on luck and start having more predictable results, because no one keeps accumulating wear until they become dead weight. The practical way I use this is simple. I set up 2 rotations in my head, a team A and a team B, and alternate whenever possible. If the mission seems low risk, I take the opportunity to give mileage to whoever is rested or to characters I want to develop, and keep the most tired ones for internal roles or for a real break. This keeps efficiency high because you avoid sending fatigued people precisely for the most important checks. And there's a golden rule I follow. If I start failing in sequence, I stop insisting with the same people and change the away team immediately. It's tempting to think just one more try, but that's the moment when fatigue deceives you and drains your progress sector after sector. Rotating early gives that feeling of competent command, because your crew continues to perform without entering that cycle of inefficiency that seems small but destroys the campaign's rhythm. I treat save and reload as part of my survival kit, because this game has a very ruthless side of management and risk that can punish a wrong decision too quickly. It's not about cheating. It's about protecting a run you've already carefully built when the game decides to throw a cruel narrative event in your face. My personal trick is simple. Before any choice that seems big, those options that look like a point of no return or a mission you feel could go very wrong, I make a manual save. If the mission goes south, someone important dies, or you end up with a result that clearly pushes you into a dead end, I reload and try another approach, as if it were a second reading of the same scene. The reason this works so well is that in a game of this type, losing a key character isn't just losing a unit, it's losing function, efficiency, and stability for the rest of the campaign. Sometimes the only difference between a memorable run and a destroyed run is having the chance to choose an alternative in the same event, especially when you realize the game put you in a dead end without clearly warning you. Now, I impose a rule on myself so as not to turn this into an addiction. I only reload when the result is truly catastrophic or clearly unfair given the information I had. If it was my mistake and it's possible to recover by playing well, I move forward and swallow the loss. But when the mission steals your run out of nowhere, saving and loading becomes the most honest way to keep the experience fun and strategic, rather than just punitive. It took me a while to accept a very simple truth. A standing crew member is a wasted resource, and this type of game doesn't give you much leeway for that. When I started recycling those who were inactive and turning those people into repair labor, my ship became much more stable, and I stopped living with that feeling that everything is breaking at the same time. The trick is to look at your crew as a set of flexible teams, not as people who only have value when they are on a mission or in a perfect post. If there are people idle, while the hull is crying for maintenance, a room is damaged, or an important system is wonky, I put those folks into engineering teams immediately. It's much better to have people pushing repairs and restoring functionality than leaving them left over while the rest of the ship suffers. What changes in practice is the rhythm. Repairs start happening before they turn into a crisis, and you avoid that domino effect where a small problem becomes a chain of failures. I also feel that this improves my decisions, because when the structure is being continuously fixed, I can risk a little more in exploration or missions without fear of walking on thin ice. Just be careful not to always concentrate the same people on this if the game is punishing with fatigue. I usually alternate when possible. And the best part is that this repurposing of inactive crew members is a tip that scales with the game. The more stuff you have to maintain, the more value there is in not leaving anyone without a role. Whenever I notice a large idle group, I already interpret it as a sign that I'm mismanaging the labor distribution, not as extra people. Make this adjustment and you will feel your Voyager getting more efficient, more reliable, and less of a hostage to random emergencies.